very happy to be joined by Arne Buthmann from Valeocon Management Consulting. Arne has worked on a variety of projects in the life sciences industry as well as the financial services industry. His expertise is in systematically capturing and translating customer insights into business transformation and capability building initiatives. Arne has a master's degree in organizational psychology from the University of Hamburg, Germany. Arne, thanks so much for joining us in Client Feedback Tool. I'm Rob Fluitt. I'll be your moderator today. Arne, we're looking forward to seeing you.
Thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. And yeah, thank you very much to everyone who has dialed in to this webinar. I'm looking forward to sharing with you our experience in understanding client experience with client journey maps. And during the webinar, I will also ask you through a poll what your experience is with this type of tool concept of client journey maps and how much you've already used it, which will give me also a better idea around your previous experience, and then I can definitely also target the presentation a bit better to this. So again, thank you very much, and yeah, let's dive right in. So with this presentation, I would like you to better understand why caring about client experience is so important, and then related to that, how you can actually use these client journey maps to better understand the client experience. And that means how to use the maps, how to scope them, how to understand the key components, but also understand some of the challenges in using them. In terms of the agenda, I would definitely like to start with emphasizing why client and customer experience is so important, and then look closer at the client journey maps, challenges in using them, and then I have a case study, and at the end we have some time for questions and answers. So I would like to invite you to spend like 15 seconds or 20 seconds on thinking about a great client experience that you had. Could be work related, could be in your leisure time, and I think the question is really like, what actually made it such a good one, but also, did you tell anyone about your experience? How many people did you actually tell about your good experience? And then, of course, the last question, have you interacted with the company again since you had this experience? So if you want to think about an example or two where you really felt in the recent time that you had a good experience, then the second set of questions is now imagine a terrible client experience. And I'm sure all of us had that. So what made it such a bad one? What was actually the reason that you felt it was really terrible? Did you tell anyone about your experience? How many people did you actually tell? And then again, have you interacted with this company again? And the reason I pose these two questions is that I have some interesting data just to get us started around thinking around client experience, because, and you may find that interesting as well, from different sources there are some information which basically said that 94% of clients who had a low effort, easy service experience will buy from the same company again. But 9 to 15 people are actually the number of people that a dissatisfied client will talk to. How many people did you tell about your terrible experience? Also, it's from research 6 to 7 times more costly to attract a new client than it actually is to retain an existing client. Interesting other facts, 80% of CEOs believe that they deliver a superior client experience, but actually only 8% of their clients agree. And last but not least, a client is 4 to 5 times more likely to defect to a competitor if the problem is service related rather than price or product related. So I'm pulling out these numbers really at the beginning to get you're all thinking about how important it is to create superior client experience and how distracting and actually detrimental it is to create terrible client experience. And while you are surely aware of that, these numbers, I think, nicely illustrate the importance for making a real effort behind it. The truth is, though, that great client experience doesn't really happen by accident. And if you look at the companies that are successful and that are recurringly rated of high client or customer experience, you will find that they are actually making countless deliberate decisions by every single person to really help this client experience be superior on a daily basis. So with this webinar, the idea is to help you understand one method, the client journey maps, that can be used from your company to understand your client experience in interacting with you and your company, but also to understand what are some areas for improving it. Having said that, Ryan will initiate a short poll, and basically the question that I have for you is, what is customer experience for you an organizational priority? Secondly, is your organization actually understanding the client journey? And have you already developed and used this tool, the client journey map? So if you could give a quick yes or no answer to these three questions, that would be great. I hope you can see the results now.
So while we're polling,
See if that works.
one question
Yeah.
at a time. So the results from the first question was customer experience an important part for your company? We had an 82% say yes and 18% no.
That is interesting. So, but expected that the majority of you clearly would say that customer experience is a priority for you.
And here we're seeing the second part, the second question, where our organization understands our customer journey. And we had 20% say yes, while 80% said no.
So that's something that I've actually seen before, that there's definitely a discrepancy between the priority that customer experience or client experience has, but then again also the actual implementation on a day-to-day where it comes to really understanding the client journey.
Now we have our last question, and it seems like the results are coming in. We have developed customer journey maps, and we have a whopping 0% say that our company has, while everyone has stated that no, the company does not have a journey map.
Well, that makes me happy, even though I'm now hoping that I can convince you that this tool, the client journey map, may actually be helpful for you to map the client journey, but then also understand and identify what are some opportunities to improve it. So thank you very much, Rob, for that poll, and thank you all for participating in this quick polling. With that, Rob, can you see my screen again? Is that working?
We can't see your screen right now.
Perfect. That's great.
We cannot.
You cannot?
Nope. If you go back to share your screen, you may be able to.
Yeah, let me do that. Okay.
Perfect.
Is it coming back? Very good. Thank you very much. So the objective of client journey maps is to understand, obviously, the client journey, and very specifically to understand what is actually the client doing when interacting with you. So I guess in your case, the majority of you being on a project business means that the client journey is probably really happening from the initial engagement and their interest in working with you to really closing out the project. So along that journey, what is actually the client doing? And then really even more interesting, what are the client thoughts in terms of their feelings and their thoughts with the interaction with you? And also, what are their specific interaction points? With who from your company are they interacting? And then with this information, and it is very interesting then to derive what is the real client experience in terms of where is it good, but also where do gaps occur. So that's the theory. Now let's look at an example of a client journey map. You see on this slide one version, and later you will see that there are many versions for how they could look like. But in the core of the client journey map, of every client journey map, is really the process through which the client is interacting with you. In this case, it's a broker selling insurances and interacting with an insurance company. And here we have a process where from the initial meeting of the broker with the insurance company over understanding the request for proposal and the underwriting, getting a proposal delivered, and then hopefully making a sale, and then enrolling their clients into the new insurance. And you have always a process in the middle, and then around that you can read here now the specific emotional experience in terms of what is the client thinking when interacting with yourself, what is the client feeling, and you also see, for example, here specific client or customer needs for each specific process step, and very importantly, touch points. So who are the people that the client is interacting with in this specific step on your side? Because it will surely not always be the project manager all the way through who is the main touch point. So that's an example, and again, I'll show you later other examples. But the power, again, of these client journey maps is to focus in on very specific clients and their experience along the journey, probably in your case, in most cases, really along a project cycle. So the use of these client journey maps is really to learn end-to-end from a client perspective what they feel, what they think, who they interact with, what they are doing, but also to build awareness for what the client experience is. Because very often, as a supplier or vendor to these clients, we only have a very specific view in terms of the individual interactions we have clients, but we sometimes or very often really lack the end-to-end experience along the journey, and that really gives us the full picture. We can also use these client journey maps as training collaterals when it comes to enhancing the service culture, enhancing the client, the customer experience capabilities of our colleagues. And finally, of course, we use it to identify pain points in the end-to-end process or in specific sub-processes. So when creating such a map, and later I'll show you how we go about this, there are a number of things to consider. One, obviously, is should we always look at the end-to-end journey from, if I take the example of a project, really from the initial scoping and engagement phase all the way through the closeout of the project, or should we focus in on specific sub-processes? The answer is always it depends on what you want to achieve with these maps. If your interest is really to understand the client experience along the whole project in the interaction, then obviously you would tend to use an end-to-end process. If you have the impression that client experience really is very low or particularly high, if you want to learn about more of that in specific segments, you can also focus on just simple sub-processes. One thing that is important is that these client journey maps should really be targeted at very individual types of clients, meaning if you're interacting with different types of clients, the sponsor of a project versus individual associates that work on the project, and you know that your clients have of different type and will probably also make different experience with yourself, the recommendation is really to look at individual client journey maps per client type. What we recommend though is to make it really meaningful is to always pick one specific person that actually your colleagues know on the client side, either on the client sponsor or client associate side, so that you really have not only the function or the title of the specific client role, but you are really making it meaningful by knowing the person. Surely another thing to consider is also, should I look at different products or services, or should I look at different suites of products or services? And again, recommendation is here to draw client journey maps by type of product, by type of services, because the assumption is that the experience may really change, the experience may be different depending on what type of service or product you're offering. And the client journey map loses all its value if it comes to any type of average experience. That is not meaningful. It's really the individual experience that we have. And then finally, another thing to consider is really the detail of the deliverable. How detailed should your maps be? And again, I'll show you different examples later. And this is really much determined by what you want to do with it and what you want to learn from that. So general recommendation here is start with more details than you actually may need later, because the more you collect in terms of client experience, the more you understand the client experience, the better will it be later to focus on specific aspects that you can then visualize. So what you should always find in a client journey map is, in that sense, the customer type, what type of, who from the client or customer side is really the person that you want to understand better. Then really some persona information from your client to make it meaningful and personable for your own colleagues when they look at these maps. A high-level process, the high-level phases and steps your client goes through, and then the specific client needs at each step, at each phase, the specific client and customer thoughts at each step, the feelings that the client goes through, and the individual touch points that the client has with either your employees, or sometimes clients also only interact with IT systems, and then this would also be an important touch point we want to mention here. So I have said that earlier, these client journey maps come really in different shapes and sizes. So for example, here on this page, you see a very first draft of a client journey map that actually maps the experience of going to the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And you see here that we are looking at a process that starts with the pre-service, where I get into a taxi and drive to the museum, and then goes all the way through seeing the exhibition, having an interaction with a professor who's explaining something, and then doing your own moving around and going to the 5th floor, and where you hang out a little bit. So just as a day-to-day example, but I think the interesting thing about this map is that it easily shows that it really is a function of what type of experience you want to map. Where do you start the process? Where do you end it? This is really end-to-end. You could have also just started with entering the museum. It all depends on what do you really want to understand better. And then you see in this map, for example, the different type of aspects that I mentioned earlier, particularly the expectations and the needs that the client has in each of these steps, and then on this kind of curve, the emotional journey between very, very negative and very, very positive experience that the client goes through. That's one example. Another example is from one of our clients' pharmaceutical business, which actually maps the patient needs of a client or of a patient that has cancer, and then really needs to go through the treatment from the initial stage of innocence and going to the doctor all the way through treatment, and then through hopefully cure at the end. And again, you see it's differently pictured here. It's much more visual than the one before, but it still has the same component around the fear, the thoughts, the activities, the touch points that a client has. And actually, all of you who have ever been through any type of experience with doctors needing to go through the journey of the healthcare system know that this is really a journey of ups and downs that map this experience. So 2 examples to just illustrate that client journey maps can come in different shapes and sizes. Now, when doing client journey maps, there are 3 typical challenges that we actually face. One challenge is a little bit on the aesthetics, and that's, as you saw in the first map, which was more like a drawing on paper, pencil. Some clients really want to see it more looking fancy, like the last example I showed you from the pharma client. Again, our recommendation is here, you should have an idea of what is your ideal client journey map framework, how should the ideal state look like, but then go through the initial draft and really review the initial draft and understand like what are the portions that you don't really like so much, and really optimize them until you find that you have the optimal map that you want to use to picturize your client journey map and also use for internal, for example, training purposes. One recommendation is clearly always set a date for the finalization of the client journey maps, because at one point you should really nail it down and say, so this is what we think our clients go through. You can always make another loop and another iteration, but we would strongly recommend to stop at one point and then use these client journey maps for improvement or for capability building issues, and only after a while maybe update them again. A second challenge that we see is that when you do these client journey maps, actually you may not like what you see. You may not be totally happy with the client journey, and in that sense, I think this is a very realistic outcome. Your clients will not always be happy all along the way. So what we would recommend in this case is really to go and investigate like what are the deeper issues that actually underlie some negative feelings, some negative thoughts of your client, because that's really an opportunity for you to learn. And actually always remember that these dips in the client journey maps indicate that there are areas for opportunity for improvement. Ultimately, you may also always remember that whoever is responsible in your company for client experience, customer experience, whether it's the marketing or the commercial officer, or whether it's a dedicated client experience officer, they need to really facilitate the process of mobilizing people and mobilizing resources for improvement. And the third challenge that we sometimes see with clients, that they actually start the client journey maps, and it seems that they keep this a draft forever and ever and never really get it finalized. That's where we would really, again, recommend to investigate, are there any deeper issues that you may still want to clarify before you can finalize it, but then really get to a point where you say, okay, what are the criteria for finalization, for publishing these maps, no matter what they look, even if they show that our client experience isn't always great, and really discuss then if there are still any barriers for making this final. With that, I'm making a short break. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now. Because before I go into a more like a case study with one of our clients where we use that. Questions, Rob? I don't know. Did you get any questions from participants already?
We have a couple questions.
Yeah,
so
super.
One question we had was, Arne, could you explain a bit more on touch points? How are they determined, and how do you measure them?
Mm-hmm. So the touch points are really the points along the journey where the client has an interaction with a representative of your company. Or if it's more a system-driven interaction like you may have when you go and buy something at Amazon, or if you have if you're buying an insurance, you will probably not interact directly with people, but rather with systems. So these are the touch points, and what is important to understand along the client journey is really that probably from the start, if I take an engineering project, from the start of the first time that a client interacts with someone from your organization, may it be a salesperson or a technician or a project manager, to the very end where the client maybe receives the final invoice from your finance department, there are different touch points, and there are different people and systems that your client interact with that always have the opportunity for creating a great experience, but vice versa also really need to be understood if these are causes for dissatisfaction on the client side. Does that answer the question, Rob?
That does. We have another question.
Yes.
Arne, what do you think the key drivers of success are for creating and implementing the use of a customer journey map?
So the key driver is that there is a leader in the organization who, ideally of course the CEO, who says that client experience is a key priority for us, and we probably acknowledge that client experience along the journey is not always optimal and has room for improvement, and we really want to make a concerted effort as an organization to improve that. So I think these kind of things can only be led by the top, because at the point where you then identify areas for improvement, you will need to really mobilize your organization, get the commitment from the different people who have touch points with your client to really make changes. And that cannot be an effort that is led bottom up, but it must be really driven top down. That's for me the absolute key. I think a second one is around capabilities, and that's really a question of understanding, like do we have the right skills to understand and interact with our clients, because one thing is to deliver services or projects for them. The second one is obviously to start a dialogue with clients, to really show willingness to better understand their needs, their current thoughts, their current feelings, which may not be comfortable in the first place for some people in the organization, and which may need some kind of training, capability building to really make meaningful interactions. And I think actually, Rob, you from a client feedback tool perspective, I think that's exactly the same that you will probably also face when you promote when your clients use your tool. You really have to be open and willingness and able to interact with clients. And I think a third is really that you may want to have an organization that takes care of client and customer experience, whether it's your sales or marketing department or whether it's a dedicated function, because in the end, what these client journey maps will tell you that there are opportunities for improvement, and you need good project management and a good discipline to really rigorously following up on that. The main learning for us is that there's definitely no use in interacting with your clients and asking for their feelings and thoughts if you're actually not following up on that. Then it is even worse than not asking.
Perfect. So the following up with your clients always makes them feel a little bit more inclusive in your journey map. Is that something you'd agree with?
Exactly, absolutely.
Perfect. And we have one more question. It was about your actual journey maps. The question was about how do you guys decide what number to assign in the emotional expectations? How is that scale created by you guys?
Okay, maybe that's a good segue to the case study, because then I can talk more specifically about like how we went about that.
Perfect. Let's go to the case study.
Perfect. So the case study is one of our clients, large national group insurance company, and they are a company really selling B2B insurances, so they're not interacting with the actual insurance owner, but with brokers who sell the insurances, and they have products in the life insurance, disability, accident, critical illness, and dental area. The situation for this specific client was that as overall in the insurance industry, there's definitely a challenging environment where new business prices and new renewal rates are actually increasing. So becoming and staying on top of the market and keeping the client base is really important. And in this specific case, the perceived service of this company was also real poor. They knew that, and therefore they had already made an effort to really focus more on their customers, and had issued an organizational redesign where they created a customer experience function that would not only understand but then also implement measures to better serve customers. And they had gone through an evaluation of the end-to-end process that to be really more customer-centric. So for them, the objective using these client journey maps was to understand, in this case, really the end-to-end customer experience. And you see below the process from the initial meeting between the insurance and the broker all the way through renewal and re-enrolling of clients. The second one was really to identify then the areas where the customer experience needs more attention. And thirdly, of course, to develop a strategy for how to improve customer experience. So the approach that we took to help them was, in creating these customer journey maps, we really tapped into different sources of data to better understand what are the customer needs, in order then to really provide a recommendable experience. So we really went and looked at existing voice of the customer, so industry, market survey reports, surveys, internal scorecards, internal consumer insights reports, and complemented that with market insights, where we did some desktop research, looked at articles, white papers, trends in the insurance, the broker industry to understand what are typical client experience. We, of course, also started to interact firstly with our client, the insurance company, and interviewed some of their key stakeholders about what they thought were interesting client touch points, client experiences that they had themselves, and then continued really by moving towards the call center where true client interaction happened, and looked at a 12-month call log of data, did some job shadowing of call center agents to really hear what clients told them, and started some focus groups with actually the people who deal with clients, which are the claims and client services in the insurance industry. And then we went and did work with the sales force, where we actually did multiple field office visits to really be on the ground, understand have really interactions with some specific brokers and their employees, and really interviewed field office staff to better understand what they hear day to day. And finally, we did some focus groups where we invited customers, employees, but also account managers, and really very targeted try to understand what are the needs, the thoughts, the feelings that they hear, but also what are the needs to segment customer types, to how many customer journey maps do we need depending on the type of brokers and interactions we had, and also like what, based on the type of services, is it life insurance or is it disability insurances, there were definitely different experience that client made, and so we created different client journey maps. So with this, we then set it out and said basically, okay, we have to scope this, we have to define the objective for this specific exercise. And we started initially with a strawman where we really put in all the data that we collected from the previous sources of data, which created still a picture that was very complete, but not necessarily very visual to understand the client journey. And then we filled in all the information, looked at where we still have gaps, tried to complement that with additional interviews to really gather the missing information. And with that kind of raw database, we then went out and really synthesized this information and draw this customer feeling line and add the customer thoughts and feelings along the line. And here, to the previous question, the approach was basically to say we take a scale between -5 and +5, very dissatisfied to very satisfied, and we, based on the initial interviews that we actually gathered, we did draw the line as we thought and as we heard based on the interviews and based on the data we had it, and then really started to validate that with the clients, with specific clients. And the key here was not so much to be very accurate on the 5 or the 4 or the 3, but to validate it in terms of, does this really represent nicely the amplitude of experience? So are we always like on more or less the same level around 0? Or do we actually have the extremes between very dissatisfied and very satisfied? So the amplitude was one point to validate it, and the second one was then the point-to-point variation, where we really validated and said, is it true that in the second step you were really more satisfied than in the previous step, and in this step, is it true that you were actually less satisfied than in the last step? So it was really about a validation of the amplitude as well as the point-to-point or face-by-face comparison, less of a numerical accuracy. With that, we had the initial map, and what we then did is we overlaid different maps, because not only did we look at the broker experience, but we also looked at other client types and saw whether these type of experiences from the broker, from, for example, the employees of the broker, were actually the same, or whether there were differences in the client experience. And you see here in this mini screenshot that to a large extent there were similarity, but when it came to the end of the process, there were actually quite some differences. And this is where then we used this map to identify where customer experience was poor and where certain areas of focus were. So I have the same screenshot just to repeat it. So this was the first the first consolidation of our raw data into a more comprehensive picture, not very visual, but definitely very complete in terms of understanding the needs of the clients, what actually the client is doing, what his thinking, what his feelings are, and what the individual touch points were. And we turned this into a more visual graphic, which you've seen before, where we really drew this line along the process. And we then use this to overlap it with other maps that we created. In this case, as I said, we were not only looking at the experience of the broker, but also specific employees who then really use this insurance, as well as a plan administrator who had administrative responsibilities in that. And I think in this specific case, it was interesting for us to see that the plan administrator and the broker had very similar experiences versus actually the employees who, as I said, at the end of the process were quite different. And I think that confirmed in this specific case the need to really take individual measures in terms of improving client experience based on the client type, and not just try to use a one-size-fits-all approach to improve client experience. So in this, as I said, this specific project really highlighted all areas of opportunities, and then we used this map to identify calls for action, and specifically created a high-level 3-year customer experience strategy that span really different categories, different types of services, different types of clients that this insurance company interacted with, and also developed a very detailed 1-year plan for 5 key areas that this company wanted to focus on make an effort, because that's another learning from these maps. You cannot improve everything at the same time, but you really have to prioritize on which type of interactions need to really be prioritized to become better. With that, I already have my last slide, a summary of what I think should be some key takeaways for that. So when you use these client journey maps, it is really important that you define the purpose and the objective up front. That defines if you have to look end-to-end or in a specific sub-process, if you have to look at all type of clients that you have, if you have to look at all types of services. It's really driven by what do you actually want to do with this client journey map. No use in collecting too much data if you later will not use it. The second, I think, key takeaway is never assume that you know what your clients value, what your clients want, but really ask and listen to them. I can tell you many stories about people who thought they understand their clients, but only in really talking and interacting with them, they were able to validate some of the assumptions, or even to not verify them. Also, I think important is to say that these customer journey maps should really be a visual representation of the client journey, because the easier you can grasp how the client feels through seeing these curves and the symbols, the better it is for you and your colleagues to take actions upon that. And finally, these client journey maps must be really taken must be really used to take actions and to share the insights. No use in just drawing them and then putting them on the shelf, even if they look nice. They really need to trigger action, because the moment you reach out to your clients and ask them about their satisfaction, you create an expectation that something will change. That's kind of it from my side. Again, any questions that you may have that came along the way?
Well, hey there, Arne. We do have one question that's popped up, and if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to put them right in the bottom of the box. One thing that came through was, what barriers do you see in implementing the journey map in your clients, and how does your normal client overcome that?
So I think that honestly relates a little bit back to the question of what were key success factors for implementing them, and without turning everything now into the opposite, I think the barriers that I saw from our clients were that there's always and I think we saw that in the initial poll, there's always clients will always say, of course our clients are important, of course our customers matter to us, but when it then comes to really turning that into action, you very often lack leadership or the respective responsibility, or sometimes even the time in day-to-day operations to take care of client feedback. Sometimes time is an excuse, and it's more around actually being a little bit afraid of going out and feeling uncomfortable, maybe sometimes even not wanting to know. You remember the first number that I showed, that 80% of the CEOs thought they are making their clients happy, but only 8% of the clients do so. So I think there's an implementation issue between the cognitive, yes, of course, it's important, to the real implementation barrier. And then I think later down the journey, if people really use these client journey maps and have interacted with their clients, there's definitely an execution barrier, and that comes to firstly like drawing the right conclusions from that, and not falling into this finger pointing. Oh, you see, you guys in customer service, you are the ones that make our clients unhappy, but really seeing the responsibility for client experience as an overall responsibility of the organization. It's a little bit like quality, where you can of course delegate that to a quality department, but unless really everyone in your organization finds quality as their responsibility, you won't change something. So I think the major barrier when it comes to implementation is on specific actions, but it's also on the culture that you may need to change in your organization to become truly client-centric.
Perfect. Another question we had came through was from one of the attendees. I'm a small firm with limited people in my office.
Mm-hmm.
Is a client journey map still efficient for a small business as well?
I think the answer is yes, absolutely, because you have clients, I assume, in your small office, meaning that maybe the size of the engagements that you have with your clients, the number of projects or the type of projects are, I'm guessing here, are smaller, or the number of touch points are probably smaller. I think actually the idea to capture that it may be easier for you to implement that, because you can definitely make this kind of client experience much more personal. So in the sense that you can really not just say, well, this is the touch point where a client talks to the marketing department or the sales department, but you really have specific people where clients interact with. I can also imagine that it makes it much more personable in a small company to really engage with the client and ask for this feedback, because it is then with regards to specific people in your organization and not just generally functions or roles that your clients interact with. My recommendation would be, if you're interested in this kind of endeavor, to really not make it a bureaucratic or documentation effort, but really use it as a chance to map out quickly the cycle of the project and where your clients will interact with you, and then go really out and talk to clients and really get their view, which I think, whether you then draw a map or not, is a very valuable exercise, assuming you are willing to also make then adjustments to your services to make clients happier.
And we've got a couple more questions that came in, and the first one that I saw that was really applicable is, I'm a small firm, once again, someone jumping on the small firm train,
sure,
and they're asking, what is a good way for us to collect data that seems to our client that they're gaining from that?
Can you repeat, what is a good way to collect data?
What I think they're trying to ask is, what is a good way for us to collect data that doesn't seem like it's off-putting to the client?
Gotcha. Okay. Right. I think it may honestly be as simple as every project has certain milestones and stages where you probably have a client meeting in any case to really look at what has been achieved in the previous phase of the project and what are the steps for the next one, so milestones or targets, whatever you call that. And I actually think that these milestone meetings are a very good way to not only review the progress of the deliverables and the project itself, but also spend 10 minutes on really saying, like, and by the way, since we're sitting here together, can you also give us a bit of like pluses and deltas? What are we doing well? What can we do better in terms of meeting your needs, not only in terms of delivery of our project, but also in the way that we interact and that we service you as client. So I would keep it simple and tie it to natural touch points with clients that you anyway have, but then really make a specific point on the agenda to talk about client feedback. Or if you're using client feedback tool, then I think that's an even better source to really draw conclusions about the experience.
Excellent. And the last question we have here is based on customer experience. You know, we're seeing more and more people with a focus on customer experience. Tell me where you see that customer experience world going in the next 3 to 5 years.
I think what we'll see in the next 3 to 5 years generally is a differentiation between companies that truly mean it and want to do something, and those that actually just do it in terms of lip service. And the reason that I'm saying that is I think that if you look at the social networks, the whole social media trends, you see that client experience becomes so much more important and actually a source really of influencing how companies do. So if what do you do today if you go to a restaurant? You probably review online the reviews from clients who have been there. If you go on a trip, you probably check the hotel, not just on the hotel website, but through TripAdvisor. So I think social media will change the perspective of many companies in terms of making a true effort in improving client experience versus just writing that in their vision statement that they are client-oriented. So I think there will be an even bigger gap between companies, and I think it's I don't want to say a survival strategy, but it's definitely a true differentiator for the future, even more in the market to succeed.
It seems like we have one more question. This one's from
Yes.
Glenda. Glenda asks, do you have an example of a client journey map that integrates client feedback tool?
I don't, but we should create one.
Well, lucky for Glenda, we do. And Glenda, I'll be sure to share that with you later on.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Perfect. And, you know, Arne, I want to thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I believe Glenda's was the last question. She got in and right under the buzzer. But for those of us who have any questions for Arne, his information is right there on the screen. He's very helpful at very different processes. And then for any of those that may be more interested in the customer experience world, we have our conference coming up next month in May in Durham. Perfect. And what we're focusing on is client experience. We want to make sure that people understand the value and are able to gain some advantages in this world. If you guys would like to attend, give us a yell. We'd love to have you here. It's going to be in Durham, North Carolina in the American Tobacco District. I'm actually a new Durhamite, and one of my favorite places to go catch a show, catch a ball game, or just enjoy the beautiful ambiance of that area. So we would love to see you and learn a little bit more about client experience next month, May 24th and 25th. And Arne, once again, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. There will be a recording going out. Perfect. And we'd like to thank everyone for joining us. So once again, this is Rob from Client Feedback Tool, thanking you all for attending our webinar today. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much.